march. So he is marching back towards the battle. So if they're going to take out Warren, they need to do it now, and they need to do it quickly. It never even comes close to happening. The only time that the Confederates have any sort of major success, there is a toehold that is gained rather close to the line here. You can kind of see right in this area where there's going to be a Union counterattack. There is an area that it basically is a bit of a blind spot, and Heath's men are able to actually drag forward 4 cannon into this area and get them to where they are able to see the Union line. And this is going to start inflicting some serious casualties because they are within canister range. So even though they've got the fortifications there, this is going to start taking its toll. So what ends up happening is Colonel Mallon, under his own esteem, he is not ordered to do this. He launches his own counterattack to take those guns out. It is a successful counterattack. He takes out the guns, brings them back to his lines. Unfortunately, though, Mallon is going to be the highest Union officer killed at this battle. He is a very interesting study in and of himself. He was an Irish immigrant, only came to the United States roughly 2 to 3 years before the war. He begins the war as a private. By this point, he is a colonel, which is one of those things that A, shows that he is accomplished, and B, is something really you can only achieve in this sort of volunteer army situation. You would likely not see that sort of rise even in a battlefield situation in the sort of modern professional army. But that is really the only hope that the Confederates have, and once those cannons are taken, it's essentially a done deal. The Confederates back off, and there's a little bit of a standoff until Sedgwick starts to come back into the area. By this point, Lee has actually come forward himself to observe what has happened at this battle. He is going to make a comment that is probably far more famous than the battle itself or even the campaign. And I'm going to just go ahead and give you a one-to-one here. This is Lee talking to A.P. Hill about the situation. Well, well, General, bury these poor men and let us say no more about it. And if you guys know anything about Robert E. Lee, that's about as close to "you done messed up" as he is ever going to get. And essentially, this battle is almost not talked about in the Confederate camp after this. Unfortunately, on the Confederate side, there are going to be a few more casualties for their actual officer corps. So you have Brigadier General Posse, who is out of Mississippi. He is going to actually be, he served under Jefferson Davis during the Mexican and American War in the Mississippi Rifles. And he is going to end up being wounded here. He's wounded he takes a shell fragment to the thigh. Looks like he's going to recover, and then just like so many that end up wounded before the wonders of modern medicine, it takes an infection, and within 1 month he is dead. So they have lost one good brigadier general. The other one that is going to actually survive, or is going to end up surviving this, there are actually 2 more that are wounded. We've got General Kirkland, who is actually out of Hillsborough, North Carolina, so he is a North Carolina man. He is going to end up being wounded in the arm, and it's going to break his ulnar bone, which is the one that's kind of right here in your wrist. Very, very painful wound that is going to affect him essentially for the rest of his life, but he does survive. And then finally, the last Confederate general to take a wound here is another very, very interesting character, is General John Cook, who is a man who has conflicting loyalties upon conflicting loyalties upon conflicting loyalties. His father, George Cook, is a general in the Union Army. He is a cavalry commander in the Union Army, and he was the man attempting to stop Stuart's first ride around the army. What makes this even more interesting is that is also his son-in-law that he was competing against there. So his son, John, marries Stuart's sister. So he is the brother-in-law, John Cook is the brother-in-law of Stuart. His father is fighting in the Union Army, and again, his brother-in-law is one of the most famous cavalry commanders of the war. So this guy has just got a very, very interesting family history. It is key to note they actually do manage to patch up their relationship about roughly 20 years after the war. They finally start to come together and be able to actually acknowledge each other again. But he's wounded 7 times during the war. So this is going to be one of the 7 wounds that he takes. In this case, he is going to take a musket ball to the shin, and it is going to shatter that bone. So he's going to be out of the war for a little while, and this was the 6th of the total 7 wounds that this man will take throughout the war. If he walked through a metal detector, he would have set it off. So this battle, Not good for the Confederates. You're looking at roughly 1,400 casualties in this battle. It's not a massive loss, but when you're Lee's army and you're working on the numbers that he has, you cannot spare 1,400 men. They are largely men that are either killed or wounded. There are actually very few captured in this battle on either side, so that makes it even worse. You're not even going to get a lot of these casualties back, as you often might through exchanges, even if that was still going on at the time. The Union, on the other hand, takes a total of roughly 540 casualties, so they very much come out on top on this one. This also sort of springs Warren into notoriety. I know nowadays we tend to know him as the unsung hero of Gettysburg, the guy that goes up on Little Round Top and goes, "Where the heck is Sickles and why is there nobody here?" and kind of gets the word and pulls troops up there. But as far as the army is concerned, this is going to be his kind of moment, and this is what's going to catapult him to later on being the Corps commander for the 5th Corps, even all the way up until the Battle of Five Forks. So that is essentially the Battle of Bristoe Station. Again, not a good situation for the Confederates, but at this point, Lee realizes he needs to pull back. He's too far from his supply base, his men are far too strung out, and if Meade reverses his line of march quick enough, this campaign might go even farther south for Lee. So he's going to start pulling back, and if you wouldn't mind, we'll go ahead and click on there. We're back to this one again. So he's going to start pulling back, and Meade does a very good job of reversing his line of march. He does not attempt to turn the troops around and have the same order on the way out. So Warren's Corps is going to lead out in this pursuit. And again, while the Confederate infantry might not be at its best at the moment, Stuart is at his best at the moment. And this is going to lead to a small cavalry battle, but a massive moral victory, especially for Stuart himself. If you wouldn't mind clicking on to our next one here. This is going to be the Buckland Races, as this battle eventually is called by, especially the Confederates. So Stuart has got Kilpatrick attempting to get past his screen, and we all know good old Cavalry loves nothing more than charging headfirst in and not considering anything that is around him on either side. Stuart has lured him into a trap here. He is going to start withdrawing his force farther and farther back. Meanwhile, Fitz Lee is coming down on Kilpatrick's rear, and this battle is going to end up with now Kilpatrick being outnumbered 2-1, and the Union break, and they break hard. We're talking that this is why the battle ends up being known as the Buckland Races, because they are chased on what is called by one of Stuart's staff officers a fox hunt for 5.5 miles. That they are going to be all mounted, galloping hard, chasing after the Union, taking prisoners left and right. So again, while the Confederate infantry is not doing that great, Stuart is really attempting to get back into Lee's good graces, and quite frankly, he is doing a brilliant job. So, we're going to move on now to our final battle, our final setup here. Go ahead. So at this point, we're moving back down again. We're almost back down to where Meade's original camp around Brandy Station was. We are back once again at the Rappahannock River, which is just a river that gets crossed so many times and is brought up in so many campaigns. But essentially what we end up with is a battle over 2 fords. And if you wouldn't mind clicking on to the next one, sir. Now, this is going to be the second battle of Rappahannock Station. It's another one that's not that well known. However, it is going to be a massive success for the Union Army. So, to give you the context, Lee's army is split in two. One is guarding Kelly's Ford, which is, I'm sure, a ford you guys have likely heard of before, any of you that have done any sort of major reading. This is where Pelham is killed. The army crosses at Kelly's Ford multiple times. There are multiple skirmishes there. But at the moment, you've got the 3rd Corps under French with the Union Army is very slowly, as some of you might remember French, he never does anything quickly, very, very slowly pushing his way across the Kelly's Ford. And Lee has a choice. He's got this set up here at the Rappahannock Station. He's got a pontoon bridge across it, and he has got essentially what in modern military terms would be called a QRF, a quick reaction force. He's got a little bit of a light corps set up to respond to either ford. So he is basically waiting with the bulk of his troops to figure out where Meade is going to commit the most amount of troops. That way he can respond. So over time, the day goes on, and it really looks like Kelly's Ford is the place that he's going through. because Sedgwick's corps, this is the 6th Corps, moves in quickly, takes the high ground around this facility, around this setup, the bridgehead that Early has on the opposite side of the river, but then does nothing. Just sits there. He sets up his artillery. They start hammering at them with the artillery all day, but the Confederates have had a few days to set up some very, very good earthworks, and for all intents and purposes, the artillery barrage is noise for these troops, especially again when you're considering that these are veteran troops. You actually have a North Carolina brigade here under General Hoke. Hoke will actually not be present when the battle actually goes down. He is called back for a meeting roughly 4 hours before this goes down, so he is not going to be here, and it's actually going to be a good thing for him that he is not here. Because what ends up happening is, and I actually looked up the term on this, this is a textbook maneuver of, or a textbook example of a coup de main. So a coup de main is, according to the U.S. Defense Department, is an offensive operation that capitalizes on surprise and simultaneous execution of supporting operations to achieve success in one swift stroke. And if there is ever a textbook example of this in the Civil War, it is going to be this battle. We hit about 6:45. It is dusk, the artillery stops, and for all intents and purposes, the men that are here, we've got Louisiana troops, and they are not the Louisiana Tigers, or at least not the original ones. They are going to give themselves that name, much to the displeasure of the original Louisiana Tigers Regiment. These guys, however, are not the originals, even though they will consider themselves to be. However, that's not to take away from their prowess. These are veteran troops that are here. They are going to be prepared to settle in for the night, and instead of having a restful night and waking up the next morning, all of a sudden the Union troops explode forward. They have been ordered to go in with unloaded muskets and fixed bayonets. They are not stopping to open fire, and what ends up happening is basically the entire Union force is up and over the earthworks before hardly a shot is fired. There is some resistance before they get there. The 6th Maine is going to be the hardest hit. They will take fully half of the Union casualties at this battle, and they're the only ones that really take any sort of hit before they get to the earthworks. But they also have the honor of being the first ones to plant their flag on the earthworks. They are the first ones up and over. They are followed shortly by Upton's brigade over on the left side over here. Upton is later on going to be very, very famous, for his assault at Spotsylvania, where he's the guy that determines that instead of having all of our men spread out in a line when we're attacking these fortifications, we need to stack them, we need to push them straight in so they break the line and spread out. He later on is also actually going to write the Army manual that actually goes forward for a long time. So he actually has some big influence on the American Army itself. But the point is here is that his troops as well are up and over those earthworks within minutes. And this very quickly becomes a very bloody and in-your-face, essentially hand-to-hand combat. But the battle is essentially over before it even begins. The Confederates are very quickly pushed away from the pontoon bridge. There is a handful of them that manage to run the gauntlet under fire and get back across the pontoon bridge. Early tries to bring up reinforcements, but by the time he has got those reinforcements up, all they can do is essentially watch as the roughly, I think it is 2,000 men on the other side are rounded up and captured. And so what we have here is essentially almost 2 whole Confederate brigades that end up being captured in this operation. So again, the casualties, when you look at it from just the purely surface level, doesn't look that high. You're looking at 2,000, roughly 2,000 casualties for the Confederates, and that's actually going to end up being roughly 80% of the troops that are engaged here become casualties, and most of those are going to end up in Union prisoner of war camps. So you have this massive amount of veteran troops that are completely swept up. Roughly 419 for the Union side, killed and wounded. Half of those are going to be the 6th Maine. Again, they're going to take the highest amount of casualties for the Union on that day. There are going to be multiple Medal of Honors passed out for this particular battle as well. Most of them, as per usual with a lot of the Medal of Honors given out, involve seizing the colors from the opposite side. But there are at least 3 that are given out here. And basically, this is an incredibly humiliating defeat for the Confederacy. Again, these are not green troops. These are some of the best that the Confederacy has to offer at this time. Lee orders the bridge to be burned, and essentially he is going to pull his army back to their original starting point. And while Lee does not give us a brilliantly scathing line about this battle, his chief of staff, or his lead guy, Colonel Taylor, certainly had something to say about it. And this is him. This is after Gettysburg, keep in mind. The battle where they've taken the most amount of casualties they've ever seen. It's the biggest upset ever. This is Taylor talking about this small battle. This was the saddest chapter in the history of this army. And it was the result of miserable, miserable management. And so essentially there is going to be an inquiry put forward by Lee to investigate exactly what happened at this battle. Early is going to come under investigation for a little while, but nothing really gets going with it. Quite frankly, the Confederates have got other stuff to worry about at this time. So nothing actually ends up going forward with it, but you end with this campaign with both armies essentially back where they started again, but the Confederates have definitely taken the hit as far as this campaign is concerned. So both armies are back where they started, and if you wouldn't mind, we should be on to our last slide here. So that's where we're at. Both armies, again, are back where they started. Lee's going to set up around the Clarks Mountain area. Meanwhile, Meade is going to get himself set up again around Brandy Station. They're going to have one last little spat before the end of the year. That's going to be the Mine Run campaign. It's a very minor engagement. If there is a forgotten campaign that is even more forgotten than this one, it's the Mine Run campaign. To be fair, the campaign lasts roughly 5 days at most. So it is definitely a relatively minor action. And essentially, for all intents and purposes, both armies are going to go into winter quarters here shortly after this. And we'll be essentially planning for the next time around. I think I've got one more slide there if I want to. All right, so like we said, kind of bringing us all the way back to the beginning again. Why is this campaign considered forgotten? So low casualties is the big thing. Again, you've just had the massive Battle of Gettysburg. You've got the second bloodiest battle in American history at Chickamauga going around at roughly the same time. And again, it's just overall the casualties for the entire campaign are less than 2,000 for the Union and just over 3,500 for the Confederacy. So again, relatively small numbers as far as casualties are concerned. And again, no major objectives are achieved. I compared this earlier to the Toloma campaign, which is another one that's kind of forgotten. It is a brilliant campaign of maneuver on the part of General Rosecrans, but at least with that one, he achieved his objective. He might not have trapped Bragg, but he took Chattanooga. So he at least got something done with that campaign. On the surface level, there's not much accomplished by this campaign. They go up close to Washington, D.C., they come back, they set up exactly like they had started off before. So again, and it's going to be just overshadowed by those battles around it. Also, and this is where my personal bias comes back in, I do think that there is a massive anti-Meade bias in a lot of these things, and that is largely due to everybody's favorite political general, General Sickles. So General Sickles, obviously he's going to be rather bitter about the whole situation that happened at Gettysburg, and being the good politician he is, he's going to cover, well, excuse my language, he's going to cover his ass. He's going to make sure that he is going to make sure that everyone realizes that he saved the army, that idiot Meade had no idea what he was doing. I'm the one that actually won that battle. And Meade, I love him. He's not a likable guy, though. He is very good at his job, but he is not a man that is a sociable one. He hates politicians. He hates reporters. So basically, he's got nothing on Dan Sickles, who is going back to New York and getting with all of his political buddies and getting all the newspapers out there about this. And what makes this even worse, and while I love Sickles for what he did to help preserve the Gettysburg battlefield, largely he possibly could have named it the Sickles battlefield about the amount of work he put in to preserving his crowning achievement. Meade is going to die roughly 4 to 5 years after the war, largely due in part to the multiple wounds he takes throughout the war, especially during the early parts of the war. Meade is wounded multiple times. So not only is Meade not even really capable of fighting back against Sickles' sort of campaign against him, he dies shortly afterwards, and for some reason, Dan Sickles, the guy that got his leg shot off, is going to end up living almost forever. He's one of the longest living Union generals, and so he gets essentially 40 years to put down Meade's name with no response. Nobody is saying that he is wrong, because again, while some might respect Meade, nobody really liked him that much. He is well known for giving massive tirades, chewing out junior officers. But again, I do think that there is just some lingering, we don't really care about this one, let's get to where Grant takes over and Meade is just sort of playing second fiddle. That's just my personal thought on it. I don't have very much proof, but that's just, again, because I am a big Meade fan. And then we've got actually one more slide here to just talk about why I think it should not be forgotten. This is the ultimate sign of things to come. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia has clearly lost a step. They are by no means done, and as we know, the war will drag on for several more years. Lots of more men are going to be killed, and Lee is not going to go down without a massive fight. But you can tell at this point that while Lee is still firing on all cylinders, he had a good overall plan. On the tactical level, his officers failed him. And that's going to be a reoccurring theme as we go forward, where originally he had this core of officers that he trusted, and those officers had a core of junior officers that they trusted. They are either dead, wounded, or out west. So this is going to be a sign of things to come for Lee. This is going to be one of the reasons why, even though he continues to attempt to be aggressive when he can, it never seems to quite work. He just doesn't have the junior officers that he had before. So this is also a massive morale blow. When you look at any of the letters home from the men during this period in time, they're sending almost as gloomy messages back home as they had on the retreat back from Gettysburg. Because again, this was not a good operation for the Confederates, especially the Second Battle of Rappahannock Station. And on the other side of it, this is going to be, in my opinion, one of the Army of the Potomac's best performances on the tactical level. Warren was very astute in setting up his defense, and then the Battle of Rappahannock Station is just, it's just super surprising because overall the guy that's in charge of that operation is Sedgwick, and let's face it, we never associate Sedgwick with aggressive and overwhelming attacks. He is a competent officer, but he is by no means the officer that you want to send off on an independent command to aggressively attack the enemy. But here, they end up winning a battle, essentially. This is the first time that the Union Army triumphs over the Confederate Army, where the numbers are completely even on either side and the Union is attacking. So this is a massive morale boost for the Army of the Potomac. And then again, just in the end of it, I really do think that Meade himself deserves more attention. So that's why I put at the end a very, very little childish thing that I occasionally put around on the social medias as the hashtag justice for the goggle-eyed snapping turtle. And I really do believe that Meade could use some justice and use a little bit more attention. But again, that is essentially the Bristoe Station campaign. It's not flashy, but it's got a lot of really, really good insight into what's going on with these two armies if you really take a time to sort of peel back the layers on it. That's all I've got for you guys.
Thank you.
And I'll leave the floor to you guys for any questions. Of course you. Of course you're going to question. Thanks.
Is the Confederate Hoke General, is that what Hoke County is named
Yep, of
after?
Hope County fame.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely of Hope County fame, though I'm not sure he'd be happy with his current, the situation that Hope County is in today. It is named after.
That's a hopeless story.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason we call it Broke County.
We do too.
Do you really?
Yes.
Oh, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think Lee suffers even earlier than Gettysburg, Chancellorsville. Although he pulls off, a near miracle there, he loses heavily in his middle office in Florida, particularly.
Absolutely.
He goes to Gettysburg with a lot of men in new positions that they've not worked together.
Not worked in. Yeah, no, and that is the sort of other side of Chancellorsville. Everyone tends to look at the tactical brilliance of both Jackson and Lee, and understandably so, but the casualties that they take are not something that Lee can really afford, and then obviously the biggest casualty being Jackson, and then of course the everlasting shame that it was North Carolina troops that did it. Yes, sir.
I think it needs to be mentioned that even though casualties were not that great, the Confederate casualties fell very heavily on North Carolina. John Rogers Cook's brigade was North Carolina, And of course, Hope's brigade was North Carolina, so the casualties, this was a
Bad day
week or
for,
so
bad day for the Old
Carolina.
North State. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts on, some writers have said that Meade's failure to attack the entrenched Confederates during the Mine Run campaign really hurt his reputation?
I'd say so. I mean, it's time and time again that you've got the sort of trade-off with Meade. He's often criticized, like you said, of being a little bit too cautious. And when it comes to the Mine Run campaign, it's one of those situations where I think Meade was probably in the right. He had good intel. He realized that these are in entrenched positions. But yeah, that's going to be another blow to his reputation. And then on top of it, let's face it, he got a lot of criticism for not, and I quote, pursuing Lee aggressively enough after Gettysburg. You got to give it to the guy, though. Again, he just got through the largest battle in American history. He took over the Army 3 days before. The fact that he was able to get his men marching in the general direction of Lee in that retreat, I think is kind of a minor miracle in and of itself. But no, that is a good and fantastic point, and I do think Mine Run really just kind of destroys his reputation even more, unfortunately. And again, his reputation with reporters isn't great. But one of the things I love about Meade, and this is something that Grant said as well, that when he showed up, Meade was more than willing to give him the command of the Army. And that's one of the things that I absolutely love about Meade. He said that, look, and this is paraphrasing obviously, but essentially, if you need your man here, I will step aside if it's the right thing for you. And Grant, in his memoirs, particular about Meade, wrote that at that moment, he knew that Meade should continue in the position of the Army of the Potomac. Because at that point, he had essentially proven to Grant that his ego is out of the picture. If you want him somewhere else, he will go there. Good stuff. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.